that a lot of things that we were talking about were thought of as not mainstream. Most Americans did not agree with me about the war when I spoke out against it, but they did when Barack Obama ran for president. The second is that Barack Obama is a much more disciplined candidate than I am, and that his organization was much better disciplined than I was. The third is that between our two campaigns, YouTube and social networks were invented. They didn't exist when I campaigned, and Obama used them masterfully. And the fourth is that there's two interesting things I want to tell you, so I have to back up a little bit. In 2003, we hired a guy named Joe Rosebars to do our internet stuff. And we did an enormous amount of stuff. He left the campaign after it went away, after we failed. And we then hired, and he started a company called Blue State Digital. We then hired him at the DNC. He built a lot of our technology at the DNC. And then Obama hired him in 2006. So there's a direct thread that comes from our campaign through the DNC to Obama. That's the first thing that happened. The second thing is that we really were ahead of our time. And there really was a lot of stuff that intervened in between that changed all of this. And they had the benefit of Obama being a much better candidate than I was. But they had a benefit of a youth movement that started in 2003 that was growing rapidly. Let me give you some figures about young people's voting in America. Young people have always had a terrible turnout in America, the lowest of any place. In 2004, in part to a campaign run by my predecessors at DNC with Sean Combs and Russell Simmons, aimed at young African Americans, turnout went up 20% among young people. Why? Because in fact, when you aim at young African Americans today, you're aiming at a whole culture. 80% of the records that are bought by hip-hop artists are bought by white teenagers in the suburbs. So instead of just hitting African Americans, where there was a huge turnout, we also hit young people for the first time. So in 2004, the turnout was up 20%, and 57% of them voted for Kerry. In 2006, the turnout of young people went up 24% over the previous off year, and 61% of these young people voted for the Democratic candidate for Congress. And in 2008, for the first time in my life, more people under the age of 35 years old voted in the election than people who were over the age of 65. In 4 years, the entire political equation was turned on its head. Obama is the first candidate who speaks for this generation. This is the John F. Kennedy of my generation. First of all, this is the first multicultural generation in the history of America. America is a multicultural place, but this generation sees themselves as multicultural. I can't tell you how many young people have come up to me and said, well, you know, my dad is Asian, my mom is white, and my friends are all different. We just don't discuss any of that because we don't care. Now, I find that impossible to believe, coming from the 60s generation where race was an enormous issue. And most people my age or anything like it find it impossible to believe that. But I'm beginning to think that it may be at least partly true, more true than I can admit. And Obama is multicultural, and he speaks to this multicultural generation. The second thing is, this young generation is more moderate than I am, both on the conservative side and the left side. They are center-left, very clearly, in huge numbers by their voting patterns, which puts the Republican Party in a terrible position for the future. But they don't have either of the extremes that my generation had. My generation was the confrontational generation. None of you were probably, or very few of you were around during the 60s. But it was in France, literally, and in the United States too, in Chicago, storming the barricades. Civil rights, the Vietnam War, women's rights, even the beginnings of gay rights. All these things that we changed in the 60s. This young generation is just as active, but rejects the divisive rhetoric that either you're with us or against us, which of course then the Republicans turned on us and to their benefit. This young generation wants us to work together. And we've polled young conservatives, Christian the fundamentalist Christians among young people, you know what their top 3 issues are? Poverty, climate change, Darfur. Those are the top 3 issues for young evangelical Christians in America. Now that sounds like a Democratic Party platform. Why can't we talk? So these young people say, why can't we talk to each other about these things that we care about? And Obama said that is exactly the soul of Obama's message. This new generation is tired of having us fight about things that we can't fix. Over 30 years we can't agree. Move on, do something about the things that we have to agree on, like climate change and poverty and so forth and so on. So Obama was a perfect candidate to speak to this new generation. I am not the perfect candidate. My children took me aside after the campaign and said, Dad, when they were teenagers at the time, you're too confrontational. The outrage of a parent being told by their teenage children that they're too confrontational, but it was true and I knew what they meant. You know, I came from a generation where everything was going to be a battle. This new generation does not want a battle. They want things fixed, and they're very willing to work with people who are going to help them fix it, and they don't care where they are on the electoral, on the ideological spectrum, and Obama was the perfect messenger for that, and he believes it in his heart. So there's a long list of why Obama was a much better candidate than me.